stand between some Italians and their lunch, huh? Right. I'm going to talk to you today about voice interfaces, and I want to try something I've never tried before right now. If you have an iPhone, can you hold it up with the screen facing the stage? Okay. All right. Hey, Siri. Oh. Hey, Siri. Qual è la risposta alla vita? L'universo è tutto quanto. How was that? I don't speak Italian. Okay, one more. Hey, Siri. Chiama mamma. No. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I do. I'm a UX designer. I work with Jeremy at ClearLeft in Brighton. But increasingly, at ClearLeft, we're not so much building products as we are helping organizations to do better on their own at delivering products. So lots of training, lots of working on the culture. How do you deliver better design? How do you do better thinking about your users? So, if you think your organization needs some of that kind of help, do come and talk to myself and Jeremy. And today I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of that thinking for yourselves, perhaps. I started to get, really fascinated by voice interfaces when Siri came out. And there was this question I had in the back of my mind that was near constant. And it was, when might a voice user interface make a graphical user interface redundant? Because I spent a lot of time thinking on behalf of my customers, like, how will they become redundant, or their marketplace, or how will they get sideswiped by another product? And I started to think about, well, what if we apply that thinking to ourselves? What might make a designer redundant? And I'm not the only one who's been thinking about this. Dan Saffer from Adaptive Path, he said, future-proof yourself by ensuring that the kind of work you do cannot be easily replicated by an algorithm. And I'm going to talk to you about some stuff today in which this might happen. So let's begin with what is really like today. I think for a lot of people, it feels somewhat like this. It's just kind of, it's messy, doesn't work very well. And to explain a bit further, I'm going to play you this short film. Well, it's a clip from a film which I recommend you watch all of later. This is called Curious Rituals. And the obsession here is, you think about concept videos from like Microsoft where they propose this beautiful, futuristic, amazing future where, you can put a graph on your fridge or something like that. It's just nonsense. This is more interested in what is the mundane future when things break, because that's the probable reality. Here it is.
Call Gerardo.
Name unknown.
Call Gerardo.
Name unknown.
Call Gerardo.
Calling Gerardo.
Hello?
Hey, Gerardo. Did you call?
Yeah, are we still on for coffee?
Yeah, I will be there.
I'm running a little late, but we'll be there by noon.
Okay.
Where are you?
Oh.
Call ended.
Call Gerardo.
Calling Gerardo.
Yeah. So the film is full of these little moments where she makes the wrong gesture or says the wrong thing, and it's really worth watching. So yeah, Google that. So I want to just give you a few quick definitions before we get too far into the nuts and the bolts of voice. So a voice user interface, humans and machines talking. And why is this so interesting to the tech sector? Well, really, I guess it's about making machines work the way we work rather than ourselves, fitting in with the way the computer wants us to work. That's, unfortunately, a lot of screen-based interactions are us working the way the computer wants us to. So ASR, automatic speech recognition, turning speech into words. This is something we've had for a long time. I don't know if anybody used Dragon Dictate or anything like that in the 90s. And here is the part where things are starting to get interesting, mostly because of deep learning and machine learning. So natural language understanding, turning words into meaning. We're not at the point where machines can understand us, but these three things are starting to get kind of exciting and interesting together. Now, while I was writing this talk, I discovered that Siri can tell you what song is playing through an app called Shazam. And I'm a big fan of Shazam, and I've been using it for years. But I didn't know that Siri could actually do Shazam without you having to open the Shazam app. And it's kind of interesting to think about why is it that I didn't know, right? I had to be told that Siri could listen to songs for me, right? Well, the main reason is that voice interfaces have no affordance. If you're not familiar with what affordance means, it's when a design suggests how it should be used to the user. So if you think of button shapes or the shape of a door handle when your hand sort of fits into it perfectly, the design tells a user how to use something. And of course, voice interfaces have none of that. They have no way to discover what they can and cannot do. Now, to illustrate some points about this, I'm going to take you on a journey into some classic British comedy. So I'm sure some of you have heard of Monty Python. You've probably watched some of the movies. But John Cleese from Monty Python, he also created another very famous TV show in Britain called Fawlty Towers. And in Fawlty Towers, he plays an incompetent hotel owner who lies to his wife and hires a Catalonian waiter called Manuel. And much of the comedy comes from the fact that these two people cannot understand each other. It's a kind of a bit of an ugly stereotype of Spanish people, but it's kind of illustrative for the purposes of my talk. Let me play you a clip from Fawlty Towers.
Manuel, there is too much butter on those trays.
Okay?
There is too much butter on those trays.
No, senor.
What?
Not on those trays. No, sir. Uno, dos, tres.
No. I'm mucho burro.
Yeah. One of the best comedies ever written, according to me. So yeah, do check it out. And I think that for a lot of the time, using a VUI is a bit like dealing with Manuel, really, in a way. Very limited kind of shared vocabulary, not much you sort of can say. He has poor skills and coordination. Doesn't really have any capacity to learn. Neither Basil nor Manuel actually get better at understanding each other. There would be no comedy if they did. And ultimately, Basil can never be sure that the job is going to get done. And I think we often feel that way about voice interfaces. But ultimately, if we compare Manuel to a voice interface, it's really about this. It turns Basil into an asshole, right? He treats him really badly. Now, when we think about any mode of user input, Bill Buxton, who I think he's head of design at Microsoft now, he said this: everything is best for something and worst for something else. The trick is knowing what is what, for what, when, for whom, where, and most importantly, why. So there are times at which voice user interfaces are useful, there are times at which they are not, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail later on. Now, why are a lot of people talking about it at the moment? Well, one of the reasons is WeChat, right? So there's a lot of talk, I'm sure you've read some of these articles, you know, conversational user interfaces, aren't they awesome? Well, so a lot of that hype comes from WeChat, which I suspect people have misunderstood because the user interface is in Mandarin, right? So it's difficult for people in the West to really understand how it works. But actually, if you use it, what you'll notice is you don't converse with the app or the brand. Not really. You use their menus. It's not really conversational at all. So I really do feel that conversational user interfaces as a theme is kind of a little bit hyped. But people are increasingly spending their time in chat apps, so we're building experiences inside chat that allow people to do more while they're there, said the CEO of Kik. So, yeah, keep this in mind when you hear people get hyped about conversational UI. And VUIs today, well, they're mostly transactional. They're not really conversational at all. You can't really have a proper conversation with a voice user interface. I'm sure you've probably tried this with Siri or Google, right? But they're transactional. You get to do sort of short little things along the way. So fairly limited in many ways and very problematic historically. But there is this phenomenon that Bill Buxton calls the long nose. And it's what happens when a particularly interesting user interface takes a very long time to develop. So if we take capacitive multi-touch, which powers all our smartphones now, you can see that it was kind of invented in 1984. There were actually multi-touch interfaces even before then, as early as 1973. But it took a very long time for the iPhone and commercialization to appear. And it was under everybody's radar. Nobody was thinking about it until the iPhone came out. And then all of a sudden, it's like the thing that we use literally hundreds of times a day. So the same happened with the mouse. Mouse is kind of 1965 to 1970, a couple of different people working on a similar concept. But it wasn't in our homes and offices until, what, 1990, 1965? So the question is, are we at the same point with voice interfaces? They've existed for a long time, but are we at this sudden point of the long nose when suddenly they become very widespread? The signs are that that might be happening. Now, where is VUI going as a concept? Well, the short-term promise of voice user interfaces is to simplify complex interactions into directly expressed goals. So if we take some examples from like around the house, think about what it takes to actually just play some music through one of your speaker docks using your smartphone. And it's actually a lot of steps. It's a crazy number of steps, like, flick the menu, hit Bluetooth, pair it, and then find your music app. If you count the number of steps, there's a lot of work involved in just playing some music. In fact, many more than it used to be, right? It used to be press power on your CD player or radio, hit play of some description, possibly just one interaction. And the price of a multifunctional touchscreen is the volume of the required input. So it's great that our smartphones can do loads and loads and loads of different things and the interface adapts all the time, but it means that we're pushing more work back onto the user to do stuff. And it might well be that voice user interfaces are an efficient shortcut to a lot of that work. Another thing I've been thinking about a lot is thinking beyond specific set use cases. So things like this. If the doorbell rings while I'm in the garden, call me, right? You can't really design a product or a feature for this, but what you can do is create a system of interconnected things, like if this, then that for the Internet of Things. And maybe voice is the way we control it. And of course, the other reason to get excited about it is that lots of the big players in the voice space are investing huge amounts of money at the moment. So Amazon have a $100 million fund to add voice into your startup or your product. Apple have just bought a voice lab in Cambridge in the UK. I know people at Google who are spending their time training every single Googler in how to build and design for voice. So it feels like something is shifting in that direction. And the vision for a lot of this is what's called ubiquitous computing. It's the idea, really, that computing is just kind of everywhere. It fades into the background. No more kind of reaching into your pocket for your precious phone anymore, right? Computing is just all around you all the time. And there's this ultimate goal of having, a kind of magical assistant that's with you all the time. And there's a film that summarizes this idea really well, Spike Jonze's Her. If you haven't seen it, I really highly recommend you watch it on Netflix like tonight. Because there are very few films that consider design and technology as carefully as this film does. And as you'll notice in the film, the technology is very much in the background. Now I'm going to play you a scene from the movie. Essentially, the protagonist, Theodore Twombly, has just upgraded his voice assistant, and he's at home playing a computer game.
Hey, you just got an email from Mark Lumen.
What are you talking about?
Oh, read email.
Okay, I will read email for Theodore Twombly.
I'm sorry. What's Lumen say?
Theodore, we missed you last night, buddy. Don't forget it's your goddaughter's birthday on the 29th. Also, Kevin and I had somebody we wanted you to meet. So, we took it upon ourselves to set you up on a date with her. Next Saturday, she's fun and beautiful, so don't back out. Here's her email. Wow. This woman is gorgeous. She went to Harvard, she graduated magna cum laude in computer science, and she was on the Lampoon. So that means she's funny and she's brainy.
Okay, so a few things to notice about this. First of all, he wears the earpiece for almost the entire time in the movie. And what product just came out last week? It's not about headphones. It is not about headphones. It's about this. So, a couple of other things. Notice that she mocked him when he spoke to her like a robot. And that's actually what a lot of voice products do to us, is that they change us, don't they? We speak to them in a particularly robotic tone of voice. And in fact, he had to speak that way to his previous voice assistant. Another thing is that she was reading his emails. How many people actually do this in the audience, have their emails read out to them? That's kind of crazy. That's kind of a very inefficient way to process information. So it's kind of questionable as to why she didn't just kind of flash it on screen in front of him. Lastly, this is multimodal design, right? So you have this mixture of inputs working in harmony together. The phone or the device, it's not even really a phone, is on the side. He kind of uses touch gestures to flick up the images, and then he can browse with his hands. He's using voice. So it's this kind of dance between modes of input, and that may well be our future. But on the topic of kind of, advanced AI assistants, it's kind of probably questionable as to whether we're ever really going to reach this, because the AI is overhyped. Deep learning may not produce machines that understand language like humans do, certainly not a deeper level of understanding. Because deep learning systems, AI as it is right now, it has no common sense. It has to be trained in everything. So, if I visited Italy for the first time and I hear lots of people saying buongiorno to each other, I can infer that means a greeting. A machine can't do that. It cannot make those connections, no common sense. So, again, for all the hype, we don't really know whether machines will ever have that deeper level of understanding. But let's talk about some promising voice products. So the first one has really quite changed my family life, if I'm honest. It is the Amazon Echo. It has sold 3 million units in the US, and it is selling like hotcakes. As soon as my parents saw it, they wanted it really badly. I was fortunate enough to have Jeremy buy me an Amazon Echo from the States about 18 months ago. And yeah, since it's been in our home, it's really taken over. It's launching in the UK and Germany next month. So yeah, let me just play you a little clip of what it can do, and then we'll talk about how it's changed our family's life. Alexa, play Cristina D'Avena on Spotify.
Playing Cristina D'Avena from Spotify.
Quando Johnny va, che strane cose fa, lui può spostare tutto col pensiero.
So I hope I just took you back to your childhood there temporarily. So the Amazon Echo, what do we use it for at home? Well, it manages our shopping list. We can ask it for radio stations, podcasts. I use it for cooking timers all the time. You can just say, Alexa, set a timer for 10 minutes. Yeah, and Spotify. I mean, that's amazing, right? Just being able to ask for any music in your home. My 5-year-old son, Joe, is absolutely in love with AC/DC's Back in Black. And to him, it's going to be normal for him to just be able to ask for that. Think about how different it was when we were children. A sign of the product's success, I'll just flick ahead here. You can ask it for anything on your shopping list, and it will show up on your smartphone so that when you are in the shop, you can kind of check things off. So a sign that the product is so good is that we started using it to manage my kids' Minecraft use. So we would set time limits. Okay, you can have half an hour of Minecraft. And after a little while, my kids worked out that they could use it on us. Right? So if I say, oh, Joe, I can't play with you, I'm finishing some work, I'll be there in half an hour, what does he do? He goes down into the kitchen and he says, Alexa, set a timer for half an hour. So he can hold me to it now, which is kind of amazing. So why is it so good? Well, it's the hands-free context, right? They've designed a product which fits in our primarily in our kind of living rooms and our kitchens, where being hands-free is the norm. We don't really want to give our attention to a screen in those situations. Its noise filtering and recognition is amazing. It really is one of those products that you just kind of only encounter once in a little while, that it's that magical. So I can talk to it from the next room, and it still understands me perfectly. Very focused feature set. So they haven't tried to make it a product that does everything. They are growing what it can do with the app ecosystem. But they really just said, let's just focus on doing a few things really, really well. And actually, one of the most important things that they spent literally, I guess, thousands or tens of thousands of engineering hours on was latency. So Jeff Bezos personally told the engineers, okay, get it to respond in 2 seconds. And then 6 months later, he said, half a second, and they all groaned, and half of them quit. But they worked on it until the latency was so low that it just feels like you're talking to somebody right away. And one of the innovative things about it is that it's interruptible. So most voice products, you kind of have to have this very step-by-step exchange with them, but actually it's very good at being interrupted. I mean, it's not a conversation yet, but it's still pretty good and much more flexible than other voice products were in the past. My daughter said this: speaking to Alexa is a bit like a Jedi mind trick, isn't it, Daddy? Tell her what to do, she repeats it, and then does it. Oh, proud Daddy that she noticed that. Okay, so on to another product that's kind of, the signs are that things are getting interesting. This is called Hound.
Okay, Hound. Show me hotels in Las Vegas that are on the Strip, cost less than $200 a night, and have over a 4-star rating on March 1st through March 5th.
Showing 10 results with availability with more than 4 stars near Las Vegas Strip for Tuesday, March 1st, staying for 4 nights for maximum of $200 per night.
All right. Trump being the top result, hey? That's what being replaced by an algorithm might mean. So they've got some work to do on their brand, like it's kind of clunky the way it speaks to you, but that's pretty amazing, right? That their system could infer that kind of logic from what you're saying. And you can actually build Hound into your own product now. They have a platform where you can start using their tech. Imagine if this was better connected to other apps and ecosystems. Okay, so on to the galactic empire of our industry, as I like to call them.
Okay, back on the home screen. Siri's also really great in helping me find something to watch, even when I'm not sure what it is. Show me some action movies. Okay, this looks good. I really like Skyfall. How about a Bond film? The James Bond ones. I'm in the mood for a classic. Just the ones with Sean Connery. With Siri? Cool.
Now, it looks magical. I've played around with it a bit. It really isn't as magical as she's suggesting here. But let's take note of a few things, right? She's holding the remote, she's looking at the TV, and she's talking. There's a dance between the modes of input going on there. And they've thought very carefully about the context of the living room, like when you would use that kind of touch swipey thing. So it's about, again, back to Bill Buxton's idea of finding the right mode of input and output for the right moment. Now, let's look at some things that might make it kind of truly revolutionary. So what needs to change? Well, I think there's a bit of a shift in design mindset that needs to happen. And that's partly why I'm here talking on the theme of change today. So did you know that when cars were first built, they used a tiller to steer them? Why was that? Because of boats, right? They just took the metaphors that they had and they used them on a new piece of technology. In fact, steering wheels already existed on larger ships, but they didn't think that that was a more useful design metaphor. Now, personally, I am stuck in screens mode, right? I think about pages, I think about layouts. I'm not so much in the mode until recently thinking context, sensors. It's like our habits are turning us into people who produce tillers, right? And as the technology changes, we might need to have a shift in our mindset about what we're doing. Another big barrier to voice is social acceptance. This is a screenshot from the Google Now demo video, Google Home demo video, which again I also recommend you watch. So it's kind of a competitor to Amazon's Echo. It's a funny little video because in it you watch this family waking up in the morning and using Google Home and talking to it a lot, but weirdly they don't talk to each other. But if you watch any of the Google TV ads, I'm not sure if they show any of those in Italy, I'm sure they do in some form, you'll notice that Google are always showing people using voice products in social contexts because they know people feel strange about talking to a computer around other people. I'm sure you've all experienced this. They are trying to normalize this behavior. And we had the same thing with mobile phones 20 years ago. You know, you see somebody with a phone and go, show off, right? But now we don't think like that anymore. Another very interesting product to think about. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead to a product here, but again, I mentioned this before. Another thing that might need to change is thinking beyond set use cases. This is a product from this is a demo from something called Viv, which is made by the creators of Siri, so it's the original Siri team. And what you're seeing happening here is that it's deconstructing the sentence and then turning it into, I don't know if service workers is the right metaphor. I don't know enough about front end stuff, but turns it into these little programs which can process the information and talk to different APIs. Their claim is that it will improvise using APIs on the fly based on what you are saying. Now that's a very bold claim. A piece of software that can just use any API on the fly, we don't know what will happen when they launch this thing, but it's a bold claim and it's worth keeping your eye on. Another thing that will have to change is the platform problem. So everybody is trying to grab our attention, pull us into their way of doing things. And on several occasions at home, I've picked up my phone and asked for Amazon's Alexa, or I have stood there and tried to talk to Siri in my kitchen instead of asking for Alexa. And the problem is, I need just one voice agent. I don't want, 5 ecosystems. But of course, these companies are not actually that keen on letting things work together. One example scenario is, if I'm in the kitchen, I might say something like, hey Siri, Skype my mum in the living room, because that's where the nice big screen is to talk to my mum. But Skype is currently only on my Xbox. And again, these things are not talking to each other because they want to bring us into their own ecosystems. And on that, there's this idea that the connective tissue needs to get better. You've all dealt with brittle APIs, standards that are incomplete, things that don't work well together. And actually, this stuff just, in the early days of the Internet of Things, I have to buy this kind of light bulb to talk to my, home control system. It's kind of really broken. But that connective tissue that makes all of this stuff work together is coming. So previously, the voice platforms like Siri and Google and Cortana, they were very limited in what you could do on a smartphone. So they would, in the last couple of years, all you've really been able to do is hook into the search queries, right? So if you had an app that gave you restaurant results or recipes or something, all you could really do was say, if a user asks for that, here are some search results. What you couldn't do is perform actions. But that is coming. So Siri Kit can now actually, you can integrate it into your app, and you can kind of do proactive stuff through your search results instead of just search results. So when I started writing this talk, I thought, when am I going to be able to say, hey Siri, call me an Uber? Well, Amazon's Echo can already do that, which is kind of interesting. Benedict Evans, he said this: when you can ask an Amazon Alexa to order you a car, the impossibility of returning to just the plain old web is clear. Think about what is being bypassed when you can do that through a voice system. And on the topic of making things redundant, here is the Shazam app, one of my all-time favorite apps, right? It's just amazing at recognizing music. But if you use the app, it's kind of shouty. It tries to draw me in when all I really want is a very simple answer. I just want to know, what is this piece of music? So if we imagine things like this get made redundant, well, okay, so no more swiping, no more app, no more notifications. Ultimately, perhaps no more brand. Do I even need to know what Shazam is? Maybe not. And in fact, this is not a new phenomenon in software. So if you think about Unix, the thing that powers your smartphone, it originally was just like thousands of little interconnected bits of software. How many of you can name those tiny bits of software that are running in your pocket every day? I mean, I used to do a little bit of sysadmin, so I could probably name a couple. But we don't need to know. They just work for us in the background. This is perhaps the root of software, is to kind of fade into the background over time. We don't necessarily need to know what these things are. And the complexity disappears. Steve Jobs understood this very well. When he tried to buy Dropbox, he told them, Dropbox is a feature, not a product. Is it one of those ecosystem things that just needs to fade into the background? The user doesn't need to know what it is. But I do want to talk about what we lose with these systems. We should not be blind to what this is potentially going to do. So Matt Novak at Gizmodo, he sent a Freedom of Information request to the FBI, and he asked them, have you ever used Amazon's Echo for wiretap operations? And the response letter said, the FBI can neither confirm nor deny the use of blah, 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 right? So clearly, Amazon's Echo has probably been used for wiretapping people's homes. It's quite a thought, isn't it, right? That law enforcement can listen into our home life. I mean, we're probably already living in a world where our governments can find out where we are, who we communicate with. This is yet another step further. And unfortunately, the pattern that's emerging here is that people will give up their privacy, in most cases, for convenience. One just really outweighs the other. To be fair to the Apples and the Amazons of this world, it's very hard to build a great voice product that gets better over time without using the cloud, right? It's probably a long time before we see voice systems that just work really well on our own hardware with no network connection. So I'm going to show you something pretty creepy right now. Amazon's Echo has a companion app, so where the shopping list is. And you can actually look at the history of all the queries you have used on it. So I'm just going to show you what happens when you go deeper into this app. So you're in the settings menu, you hit history, view the requests. Is this running? I'm not sure. Hang on. Is it going to go forward? Hold on. So view request to Alexa. Okay, so here's history. Here we go. So this is something my wife asked.
Alexa, play My Brother, and Me podcast.
Okay, so Amazon has a whole collection of these audio fragments of things that we've been saying to it at home. Now, their claim is that they're not recording all the time, and the network traffic and the way the button works on top of the device suggests that that is true. But the FBI are using it for wiretap. It's kind of hard to say, right? How much of this will we put up with? Kevin Kelly said this: A massively surveyed world is not a world I would design or even desire. But massive surveillance is coming either way because that is the bias of digital technology. And we might as well surveil well and civilly. The remedy is to think in terms of coveillance so that we make tracking and monitoring as symmetrical and transparent as possible. So I think the reason Amazon make this available to us is to say, here, I'm being transparent about what we're storing. Does that make you comfortable or uncomfortable? Does that give you trust or distrust? I think they're trying to be transparent with us, even though it doesn't really tell us the whole story. So, on to some practical things. If you're curious about designing and building for voice user interfaces, well, I'm going to show you something slightly scary. Well, it was scary to me when I first realized it. If you want to build a skill, as they are called, for Amazon's Echo, not an app, this is basically what you do. I mean, there's lots of code which you guys know about, and I don't, involved. But it involves a lot of this. So you have to basically input lots of versions of the same sentences. Think about the number of different ways a user could ask for something. Why? Because Amazon's Echo is actually dumb as a bag of rocks. It doesn't really know how to parse a lot of variation in the sentences, so you just have to kind of feed it lots of examples. Now, to somebody who's designed a lot of graphical user interfaces, the thought that my job in future is just to enter variations of sentences is kind of scary. But there are tools that allow you to kind of expand these. So here's just a glimpse of what it takes to build one of these things right now. But what is the kind of role of a voice user interface if we're building them? Well, there are sort of four, according to Stephen Gay and Susan Hura. There is dictation, so the secretary, right? We've all been using those systems, or not, for decades now. The second one is bouncer. So banks are playing around with security mechanisms. Apparently, they are reliable enough to tell when somebody's really speaking live into a voice user interface and who that is, or whether they are the right person. Gopher. Now, that's what we're really talking about when we talk about Google and Siri and Cortana, like performing these short transactional jobs for us. And then finally, the magic of an intelligent assistant. Now, what's going on at the moment is that the big players are effectively lying to us, right? They're saying that Siri or whatever is one of these, a magical assistant. But they're not at all. Actually, they're gophers. They're selling it as this, but the reality is it's just this. So how do you kind of go about like designing or prototyping this stuff? Well, the most successful historical method, and it was what was used to build and try out the Amazon Echo, is what's called the Wizard of Oz method. So this is where you literally have somebody, a voice actor, in another room who is acting out the role of a computer, and then you send somebody in to perform a task and see what happens, see what language gets used, see what occurs. I'm not quite sure why this Japanese guy is dressed up as an iPhone, but it's kind of interesting to think about playing the device, right? Maybe you could do a role-play exercise. That's kind of a common thing that you might use to build some of these things, to figure out what the language is. So then you start thinking about theater and improv, like how do you build the character of your application? So some things that a voice user interface is no good at. Well, it's no good at large amounts of input, right? Think about filling out forms, like, oh, God, no, it'd be awful, right? Another thing, we touched on this earlier, is presenting choice. So you kind of need a screen for choice. Voice user interfaces, if they are very successful in our future, will probably end up making choices for us as they become more and more convenient. They don't deal well with the natural way we speak to each other. If you actually listen to two other people having a conversation, there is frequent interruption, there is body language, there's a lot going on there that a voice user interface at the moment cannot cope with. The Amazon Echo actually has 7 microphones. It's incredibly good at isolating the exact person that was addressing it, but it still can't deal with, hesitations. Another thing, if you think about things we do in the world, sometimes they are fuzzy, they are indistinct. So a scenario like going shopping for somebody where you don't really know what you're looking for, but you might know it when you see it. That is very hard to put into words. Abby Jones, a voice designer at Google, who I'm going to be running some workshops with next year, she decided to carry around a voice recorder and just record herself issuing commands to the world just to see what would happen. Kind of an interesting design experiment. And she said, it made me realize how hard it was to say what I wanted in the world. There is a cognitive price in putting the things we want into words. One of the big ones that it's no good at dealing with is security and privacy. I wonder in future how we will cope with this, right? Maybe, you ever heard of where you can do noise cancelling in a discrete space? Maybe if we use voice interfaces more often in future, we will have discrete spaces where we cancel noise so we can have a conversation with a computer or have a phone call in complete privacy. Or if you think about a noisy office, a noisy open plan office, like one of these, right? Actually, maybe we need a sort of cone of silence around us to use that interface. Now, Jeremy talked about something else which I think is very relevant to voice if you start reading about how to design and build for them, which is Postel's law. Be conservative in what you send, be liberal in what you accept. We want voice systems that are really well trained at actually understanding what a user means, or a variety of accents, for example, and is very liberal about what it takes in. But the reality of a voice interface is that they should say as little as possible. That when people design these things, that's what they find. They spend a lot of time refining the sentences, trying to get the information down to a bit of information as possible. So that's a little bit about sort of what it takes to design and build. Some opportunities that I think are kind of relevant to us now. So the first one, I've touched on this, is platform integration. So if you have an app, for example, make sure that the platforms can talk to it right now. And that might be actions with Siri Kit, but mostly it's about searching. As you can see here, when somebody searches on iOS for a recipe. Another one I've been thinking a lot about is search results within an app. So this is ASOS. I don't know if you have it here. It's the big clothes retailer, online retailer in the UK. And if you think about the number of steps involved in refining your search results, it can be quite a lot of work for a user. So show me all the dresses, show me all the red dresses in size 10. Think about using menus to tap all that stuff in with a faceted search and sliding out menus and all the controls that I'm sure you guys have built. It's actually tons and tons of work on a user, many, many steps. So could you use Hound, that platform I mentioned earlier, and put it into your app and then tell the user, well, you can actually perform these smart searches much more quickly and efficiently with voice. Simple Gopher tasks, I've touched on this. I use an expense tracking app called Pennies. I could probably be tracking those small expenses much more easily using a voice interface. But as I've said, the platforms are not really allowing, or only very recently allowing, that kind of degree of integration. But really, the most important thing to think about in terms of opportunity is the context. Are you making something that might be used in a car, for example? That's a perfect hands-free context to think about how your stuff gets used. Or, I mentioned the kitchen, or, I don't know, doing something else, playing music, or what are the contexts that your users might be in where they need their attention on something else? To play with it, if you're curious, is actually very easy to get started. So Amazon have been very liberal with their tools. So you can now download a Raspberry Pi image, put Amazon's Echo or Alexa onto it, plug in a microphone, and you can talk to Lambda, which is their app ecosystem. You can have these little mini servers running for free and program stuff using Node. So you can try it. You guys could probably try out voice interfaces very, very quickly with a Raspberry Pi. I tried it. I got something really simple running in, I don't know, an hour. You would probably do it even faster than I would. You can also make a prototype. This is a hot new thing, which I haven't tried yet, but it's a prototyping platform called tincan.io. There's a waiting list at the moment. But it was designed and developed by somebody who is going blind, who kind of wants us to start practicing putting our apps into a voice user interface. So there's lots of things, exciting things we can do. in summary. But to kind of summarize the big picture, I think voice user interfaces are going to render a lot of screen-based interactions probably redundant if these products continue to grow. But that doesn't mean it can replace everything, definitely not. There are things where voice is appropriate and times where it's not. But we can start thinking multimodal and start thinking about beyond kind of these narrow use cases where we think a user is doing one very specific thing. That's kind of my summary of what I'm thinking about at the moment. But I want to give a little bit of the big picture. Ursula Franklin, she has this book called The Real World of Technology, and her summary of what technology is she says, technology is not things, it is practice. She looked at technology throughout history. It's a great read, by the way. You should definitely read this book, The Real World of Technology. So the idea is that, okay, don't think about the thing in technology. Think about the behaviors that it produces, the rituals we have taking things out of our pocket constantly, right? It's about how technology changes us. That's what we should really be thinking about. And we have this mantra that has been said sometimes at Clear Left, that we should focus on sorry. Here we go. As a result of this thinking, we should focus on outcomes, not outputs, not deliverables, not pieces of technology, but how it changes our lives. So if a voice technology turns me into Basil Fawlty abusing Manuel, that's not a good outcome, right? There's lots of people worried about the Amazon Echo now because their kids are speaking to it in this very kind of rude manner. So is that what our kids are going to be like? They can just command things in the world and be really kind of brusque to other people, perhaps? Does it train them to think that they can just demand things? Another interesting one, does it condition us to think that women should serve us all the time? It's a very important problem. I mean, Apple were quite progressive when they launched Siri, that you could, have both, but we seem to have gone backwards. Most of these voice assistants that have emerged are female, and I think that's kind of problematic. So to summarize, Mark Weiser, the kind of father of ubiquitous computing, he said this: the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. Now, I can't think of a more relevant quote to voice, right? It's basically one of humanity's oldest tools, and it disappears as soon as we say it, as soon as we say anything, right? It's ephemeral. It passes by us immediately as soon as we've said something. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much. Grazie.